One of the things that surprised me most about Division 2 at launch was the lack of a PvE Dark Zone. I mean, given all the demand that I saw for one towards the end of the Division 1's life, I was pretty sure that it would actually just kind of happen in Division 2. And to be clear, in Division 1, I was actually mostly against this issue for a few reasons. The DZ, at least as I saw it, depended on players pretty much just doing their own things, right? I mean, you had, the farmers, you had the police, you had the rogues, and without some of those players, I actually worried that the zone would just result in, boring checkpoint-based PvP like we actually kind of see now. I wanted more focus to be on new content rather than modifying, the old stuff that we already had. Like we saw with the global events. Those were fun for a little bit, but, they didn't beat new content, right? And players also offered something that, the AI could not, which made the DZ feel different from anything else. I mean, it did not feel like it was just regular PvP, and it was much more tense than missions or incursions ever could be. It had that little bit of unknown to it that actually made it fun and interesting. I mean, I do understand why players wanted a zone without the PvP. It is just that I understand it would actually ruin the actual zone for other players. Players like me who wanted that PvE-VP experience. And without PvE players, the DZ would mostly be a very boring form of PvP. Every server would just be guys standing on cars or waiting at checkpoints, for rogues to pop up. Which, that's not what I really want to go into the DZ for. Going into Division 2, I actually expected a vastly improved system. I expected them to go back to the original hardcore rules of the first game's launch, including things like the DZ rank, the blueprints, the 100% overpowered, enemies at the top of the map, punishments on death, and basically all the tension that created. To balance this, however, I actually figured they would add some sort of PvE-oriented area that allowed teamwork-based events. Much like we see in other shared world games. I mean, even poorly developed games like Anthem make an attempt to show players they are not exploring a huge empty area all by themselves. They use these type of events as part of the core gameplay and part of the grinding loop to basically just help keep things fresh. The Division has been such a disappointment to me in this aspect. The only time you can really see other players in the world is when they're just trying to kill you. Finding the DZ experience in Division 2 is such a mindless waste of time. I actually became more in favor of the PvE Dark Zone. I figured that having already killed all the aspects that made it unique, what is really the harm of now making a fun zone based around huge groups of agents fighting, mini raid type enemies and competing in battles by doing, the most damage or giving the most healing. Similar to that scene in, Skirmish, or, another game that was actually, did something similar to this was Defiance, if you ever played that. To my surprise, many players actually had the opposite reaction to this. Some people said that the LZ had everything they wanted and that the PvE DZ was, no longer needed. While I do agree that the current LZ is a vast improvement over the first, and in many ways better than the original DZ was, it still lacked the actual fun that I had, come to expect from the public events and groups of players working together like those found in Destiny. The point I still make is that Division 2 does not have that spontaneous feeling of epic adventure. It really just kind of lacks that unity that I would have expected, for the last Shade agents clawing their way to DZ to have. All these people made it to the capital just to hang out in 3 areas and go rogue. I mean, that doesn't seem right to me. That seems dumb and lazy to me. Which is why I can't see any reason to not include a way for agents to actually just have fun together, without needing to matchmake, without needing to have specific stat or number of clears like the raid does. This game can't give me the PvP that I enjoyed from the first, and honestly, there's nothing the devs can do about it. I mean, according to what they've said on Twitter. Yet, they have all the ability to actually make a new area that is unlike anything else in the game. Something that the majority of the player base would actually play. Now, one of the biggest issues that comes up because of this zone is that many PvPers hate the idea of a PvE Dark Zone because, it's not their vision, right? And this is generally because most people who talk about wanting a PvE zone do very little to actually explain it. They don't really go into detail on how they actually see it coming across. And the common point that they make is just, they want to enjoy a DZ without getting ganked by rogues. But this shouldn't be the actual main point of what I'm calling the Twilight Zone. Changing its name actually helps it differentiate itself from the Dark Zone and kind of helps pull it from the random hate for this kind of area, right? For simplicity, the DZ and the TZ would not actually have the same intentions, nor would they actually have the same loot. So it would not be the easier place to farm for unique DZ items like a lot of PvPers want to claim. If you wanted DZ loot, you would still need to go into the DZ. The TZ would actually focus more on large-scale AI battles and play more like raids, incursions, or heroic boss fights. However, that is not to say that the zone would be free of risks, Enemies like AI-controlled rogues, for example, or the marauding sewer faction that we've seen, could actually just show up at random and attack players, so that basically they would just be stopped from speed farming. Or they could attack extractions. And another idea that I've seen, very common amongst people who request a PvE DZ is the return of hunters. Hunters would actually be a really great feature for the zone. Now, they should be random and rare events, and not just spawned for a lack of design like we kind of saw at the end of D1, but they could actually help reduce player success. Hunters and AI rogues could offer many of the functions that human rogues currently provide. They could hijack extractions, they could steal, deconstruct loot, they could troll players, and they could just be simply annoying, right? Additional mechanics could be added to them to make them higher priority, like allowing them to group up, giving them additional power for each agent they kill, eventually causing them to become their own manhunt-like event, even going so far as respawning if the entire group is not killed quick enough, and maybe running away to allow their allies to actually respawn back at them. But the main focus would actually be more on the large-scale events that take place, throughout the map. Not just limiting the fights to boring landmarks. Events would have the potential of showing up at random. Think of situations like a convoy of warhounds marching through, the center of the area or along like the main roads, and it's accompanied by a large number of the Black Tusk drones. Not to mention any number of tank or APC-based fights. Basically, the goal would be to recreate the challenge of raid-style bosses without the combat being fixed to only one set location every time. The zone could also have sets of mini missions that would function similar to, the side missions, but without group restrictions, almost functioning like public dungeons from games like The Elder Scrolls Online, even going so far as to have limited time events in the sewers or the subways like mini underground modes. Now, I fully understand this is not even remotely possible given the attitude that the devs have demonstrated at every point in the franchise, but the reality of the situation is that the game needs more. Much, much more. Many of the mechanics in the sequel have so far been very boring and rather unimpressive, to be honest. Almost everything is based entirely on never making the player feel restricted, regardless of the effect that actually has on the replayability of the game. They have done nothing outside of the raid that makes the player actively adjust to any situation. This has in part resulted in the overly bland mission and boss design that many are now annoyed with. We can fully see how this strategy of theirs has just failed to pay off. If they want this franchise to survive and continue to make profit, they really need to take a look at what they can do to actually make this game feel fun. So far, it really feels like they have just lost the spark of what made The Division what it was. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.